Okay, so this is going to be on ethical guidelines in psychology. And again, this thing, I'm not sure why it does this. Not pressing anything, just happens. Anyway, we're going to be looking at the ethical guidelines in psychology. And we're going to start with the first thing, which I just want to touch upon some basics when it comes to research method. You do not need to write this down. It's just a good little thing. If you do want to write it down and find that it's helpful, then by all means, you could do that. So these are, again, the three types of research methods as a good review of the different types. So you have descriptive, correlation, and experimental. And this is exactly how usually the order that they do it. Descriptive, the purpose is just to observe and record behaviors, kind of collect the information. How do they do that? Through case studies, naturalistic observations, and surveys. And what gets manipulated? Absolutely nothing, right? It's just observing and recording. Here, there's a lot of variables, a lot of confounding variables, things that we cannot control just looking. And then, of course, single cases may be misleading, we can't generalize for the population. Then we go into correlation, and correlation is basically to see if there is a relationship between two variables, and this is going to help us kind of predict, right, the people's behavior, right, or any type of prediction. If there's a strong correlation, obviously. So how do we do this? They collect data between the two variables, and what gets manipulated? Nothing. They just want to see if there's a strong correlation between them or not. Okay, and of course, it does not tell us cause and effect. The only one that can tell us cause and effect is the experimental. And this is, again, to find the cause and effect. And how do they do that? By manipulating one or more factors, right? Variables that they want to test. And then there must be a random assignment, okay? As well as your two groups, at least two groups of an experimental and a control group. Remember, there could only be one control group, but there could be many experimental if we're doing different strategies, let's say. Then what are you manipulating? The independent variable. And then this is the weakness, is sometimes that one. They are not feasible. It's very difficult to do, right? Especially if we're looking at ethics. And then obviously sometimes it cannot be generalized in like context, in the sense of if I'm doing a study in the lab, I cannot necessarily apply it in real life, in the sense that maybe the behavior may change once they're outside of the lab, okay, which happens. Now, let's get into ethics. So at the top of your paper, you're going to write down ethics, and this is going to be the first subtopic. So first subtopic is the American Psychological Association. This is the APA, and I gave you guys the website for the flashcards. APA is American Psychological Association. It's their professional and scientific organization in psychology that basically represents psychology in the United States, which means that they're the ones that usually are funding or accepting research. They're the ones, the articles, you could actually go into their website and sign up for their newsletter. They send some interesting articles out there. So definitely, if you're into psychology and want to find research, right, or articles that are relevant, this is definitely the place to go. And they're the ones that basically created these ethical guidelines, okay? As well as the DSM-5, which is the book or the manual that is used to diagnose people. And we'll get to that soon, but they're kind of in charge. So what you need to know is really the ethics of doing any type of research on humans and animals as well. So they have an institutional review board. This is the committee that basically is going to review the type of methods you're going to do in the research and if it's ethical or not, okay? I've never really seen, honestly, too many questions on this, but just in case, if you ever see something about the board, review board is for research, okay? Now, there are different types of research out there, and I'm going to start with the first one, which is informed consent. So I want you to write this as a subtopic, or you could put like different types of ethical guidelines, I would put this as a subtopic. The first one is informed consent. And informed consent is basically that they are giving you details about the research, what they are signing up for, and then they're getting the approval or not. Okay. So please make sure that you're writing informed consent. It's not just like, hey, do you want to join my study? Right? I'm doing a study, want to be in it? Right? You have to tell them, and this is an example of your informed consent, is that they're even telling you what they're going to do. They're going to expose you to graphic images that may be disturbing. Maybe there's some lights that can cause seizures, right? I actually did a research study when I was at FIU in college for a psych class, that I had to be part of a participation, and the guy was like, "Look, this is part of the study. You're gonna look at an image, and I'm gonna zap you." Okay, he didn't really tell me the purpose of the study, and I'll tell you why. But he did inform me, and I had to give consent and say, yes, I'm okay with being lightly shocked. Okay, but you definitely need to tell them that's the difference. So informed consent is describing the research to the participant and then them giving you the okay. Now, put all this as well as a disclaimer. If if the child is a minor, okay, is a minor, then they must get parental or guardian consent. So keep that in mind, because sometimes they'll give you like a trick question and they'll be like, what's wrong with this study? And if it's a study for children minors and they get no consent, then it's unethical. Okay. Now, next one is going to be debriefing. So I want you to write debriefing as your subtopic. And debriefing is basically where they're going to explain the results, the conclusion of the experiment, right? So they're explaining in full detail the results, what they did, all of that, okay? Now, so you must, at the end of every research, have a debriefing thing in which they talk about the study. They can't just be like, okay, thank you for participating. Bye, you'll never know what this is. Here, they're getting their results. They're seeing what the study found out. Now, there is, and write this down, this thing of deception. Okay, now, deception, and write this down, is not allowed. So deception is not allowed in research, right? Like, you want to tell them the truth. However, sometimes, and please write this down, they can't tell the participants the true purpose of the study, because if not, it'll mix up their study. So a perfect example of deception is those medication research where they're giving them a placebo pill, right? So obviously they can't be like, okay, so we're gonna do this. All right, here, placebo pill is a perfect example of deception. So if they're using placebo pill, right, they cannot tell the control group like, hey, by the way, we're doing this experiment with this medication and I'm giving you a fake pill, okay, to see if you're gonna react or not. So you can't do that, right? Because it's gonna mess with your results. So be very clear that they're only deceiving them, because if they knew the truth, then it would influence their results. However, if they use deception, and this is key, if there is deception in the research, then during debriefing, which is super important, they must tell them why they deceived the participant. Okay, so if they if they deceive the participants because it's going to mess with their results, then during debriefing, they must explain why they were deceived, right? So if I'm doing the medication, I'm going to be like, hey, look, this is, during debriefing, I would say, this is my research. Look what we found out, that this new medication is going to help with cardiovascular health and this and that. And then they'll tell them, however, just wanted to let you know that you were in the control group in which you were given a placebo pill, and the reason I gave you the placebo pill is because if I would have told you, it would have affected the results and so forth. So they have to tell them during debriefing. So a very key thing, because they always tell you, like they'll give you a scenario in the research, and then they'll be like, okay, well, what's wrong? What's something unethical that's happening? Or why is this not ethical? Or how do I make it ethical? So if they deceive the participants and don't tell them, don't debrief them, then that would be your answer, right? They have to debrief during deception, okay? Or why they would deceive. All right, now there's more to this, and okay, so just quickly, just remember that they try to shy away from deception, but sometimes it's needed to make sure that the results are accurate. Now, the other thing, another ethical guideline, and write this down, it's not here, but this is going to be the next one, which is, and let me get the pen moving, sorry. And the next one is basically, so protection. So protection from harm would be the next one. Okay, so protection from harm, which is you basically you cannot endanger the person. You cannot make them worse. Okay, your job is to either make them better in this research, or they're going to remain the same. So you can't add something that is going to be a negative, right? So like for instance, there was a study on Little Albert, it's called the Little Albert experiment, in which they basically made this little baby afraid of anything furry. Okay, so obviously you cannot do that because you're adding a fear or something harmful to the child that will be long term. You would have to reverse it, which is kind of sketchy because you just never know if they're going to reverse it. Okay, then the next one is going to be the right to withdraw. So at any particular moment in a research, okay, if the participant says that they want to withdraw, so this is the next one, okay, then they have every right to stop whatever you're doing in the research and you may go, okay? And then that data cannot be used. So the right to withdraw is a really important one, as well as making sure that there is no money, so much money involved. So you can't like be like, oh, but you really want to leave when we're paying you like $100 or $200. It can't be a lot of money, and you can also use that to keep the participants there. And you'll see why this came about, which is really cool because we'll get to see the different research that led to these ethics to pop up. And last but not least is going to be confidentiality. So in any research, you cannot use real names, okay? And but you can disclose like participant one, two, you could change their names. You could use not so much initials or anything. You just basically it is anonymous and confidential. So you can't be like, oh, hey, Fulanita participated in the study and this was their results. You cannot do that. Okay, and that's basically it for that. Now, the animal one is very self-explanatory as well, in which you basically just cannot make them, you cannot harm them, right? Their living conditions must be as natural as possible. So you may want to write this down, the animal ones. Their housing must be reasonable. They must provide humane care and healthy conditions. And then if they're testing them that it's going to be harmful, that it minimizes. And if they are, let's say, past, like there's a death or something, that it must be a quick and painless death. So there's pretty much that. Don't harm the animals. Don't do the things like the shocking of the poor dogs that they couldn't leave. That would not be an ethical thing to do now. All right, and that's basically it for ethics. And that's it.